the land of wolves. Death unto the weak, no mercy XII. The boy stood upon a battlefield riddled with corpses. Deep clouds enshrouded the sky, casting a dim and gloomy mood over the plain despite it being midday. The moisture in the air signaled an imminent risk of rain, too, and within the clouds, bolts of lightning were budding, ready to be cast down to the surface. However, even though the clouds were still waiting to pour down their rain, a passing drizzle had already befallen the plain. Rain composed of vast amounts of crimson bloodshed. Stranger, gazing out towards the vast plain, collapsed there were those clad in mismatched armor that lacked any sense of unity. If anything, the non-uniformity of this diverse gathering of ages and races could be called its sense of unity. Each was equipped with unique weapons and armor, and as a whole, the group's quality could not be said to be very high. Though they might not have been regular soldiers, so to speak, neither were they a group of bandits. They were stranger. Kishidono, it seems that none of the dissidents have survived. Giving that report was an aide-de-camp who had provided support during this operation. Upon receiving information from the soldiers who had returned from reconnaissance of the battlefield below, the commanding officer, Kisha Gold, narrowed his eyes. Kisha was of tall, slender build, and his side profile still appeared youthful. In reality, he was still a greenhorn who had only just turned 18. Though factoring age into appraisals was something that Kisha's liege openly detested. Anyhow, Kisha. To begin with, the idea was to make an example of the dissidents by our hand, so the fact that they have been felled cannot be labeled as a setback in itself, however. Aide-de-camp. The prey caught in the net is a problem, correct? Kisha. Judging from the details thus far, I had anticipated the perpetrators to be few in number, but for it to have been carried out by a lone person was rather exceedingly unforeseen. Kisha caressed his slender jaw as he spoke, to which the senior aide nodded with a bitter face. Kisha, the aide-de-camp, and the rest of the soldiers deployed to the plain were the regular soldiers of the Abelux domain, belonging to Kisha's liege, Vincent Abelux. The soldiers all wore matching equipment, and bearing expressions that displayed their drive, they were dispatched on this mission. That was the subjugation of dissidents. At 16, as a member of the imperial family, Vincent possessed preeminent intelligence, and not only was he politically adept, but he also demonstrated outstanding wisdom as a feudal lord. 5 years had elapsed since he had become a feudal lord, and since then, public order within the domain had dramatically improved, and it was appraised as a miraculous state of peace in an empire where conflict was ceaseless. Of course, behind such stability was the apt removal of factors that aimed to disturb it. This occasion, in which Kisha had been dispatched with around 1,000 soldiers under his command, was just another link in that chain of reception. However, anticipating the dispatch of Kisha and the soldiers, the dissidents hastily took up arms and had tried to make preparations to intercept them. At the very least, they had displayed those movements. Before that could bear any fruit, they were annihilated by the hand of somebody stranger. Report! We have encircled the perpetrator in question. Aide-de-camp. Did you get him? Amidst his speculations, good news was delivered from an out-of-breath messenger. As the aide-de-camp raised his voice to ascertain the situation, the messenger pointed to the east side of the plain. Kisha, lend me the monocular. As Kisha issued that order, the soldier beside him presented the monocular, a tool inlaid with a curved piece of glass, for the purpose of seeing far into the distance. Receiving the tool, Kisha pointed the monocular to the east. As the messenger had reported, the soldiers deployed upon the plain were in a formation to oust something, and present in the center was a target being pursued. Focusing on the person in question with the monocular, aide-de-camp. Say not such foolish things. Reports ought to be accurate. Behind Kisha, as he peered through the monocular, an angered bellow from the aide-de-camp reverberated through the encampment. His roar was directed at the messenger soldier, but as that person adjusted his posture, messenger. Forgive me. However, matters are exactly as reported. Aide-de-camp. In that case, are you telling me to believe this ludicrous affair? That the opponent is a child? As the aide-de-camp flared up in anger once again at the messenger, Kisha, the superior officer, would have given a calm and composed comment, but given this was a former member of the Imperial Army, he was exceptionally strict with disciplining his underlings. Usually, that was reliable, but just for this instance, the messenger had erred not. Keisha, Ludgardono, he is giving a valid report. Certainly, the opponent is a child. However, as Keisha gazed over the battlefield with the monocular, his words seemed to have caused the aide-de-camp to gulp. However, at the current moment, Keisha did not have the freedom to turn his attention towards the aide-de-camp. That was because Keisha. Naturally, this cannot be labeled as any mere child, After all, towards Keisha as he looked at him through the monocular, the boy was waving his hand with a smile. 2. The boy stood upon a battlefield riddled with corpses. Beneath a cloudy sky, a boy around 11 or 12 years old stood with his blue hair, appearing darker than its original shade, tied at the back of his head, and clad in a vividly bright pink kimono. Unbecoming of a battlefield. Such words did not exist in the Empire. Even if strength and weakness existed among warriors, it was the Empire's law of iron and blood that none were labeled as unfit to be a warrior based on age, sex, or race. Regardless of whether he liked or disliked those customs of the Empire, an evaluation criteria founded in the imperial way was also present within Keisha. And without even needing to compare him with that criteria, the boy was exceptional. Keisha, 4 times. Surrounded by 1,000 soldiers, Keisha took a step into the encirclement. Of course, the aide-de-camp and the other soldiers had tried to prevent Keisha from stepping out to the front. But, having met eyes with the boy through the heaven's eye, Keisha was clearly being called for. Even if something were to happen to him, his experienced aide-de-camp would likely pass the correct judgment in an instant. Against this small monster before them, they absolutely must not take up arms. Keisha, 4 times have you gone around subjugating those who brandish rebellious intent towards His Excellency Vincent Abelux. I wonder, have you no objections to our perception? Boy, oh, incredible. You've even properly counted the first instance, haven't you now? For that one I'd yet to reach the idea of doing it in a consistent way, so it was a bit of a vague method. But I'm glad that you still noticed it. Besides, Keisha, boy, you are exceedingly superb. Coming out on your own in this situation, it's truly splendid. Crossing his arms, the boy nodded in good humor and affirmed both Keisha's words and intent for dialogue. For a moment, Keisha was taken aback by the energy-filled response, but he quickly regained his composure. As a matter of fact, this was not the first time that Keisha and the other soldiers had been deployed to subjugate dissidents, only for them to have already been annihilated before they could clash. It was the 4th instance of such an occurrence. Having uncovered the presence of dissidents within the Abelux domain, the troops dispatched to subjugate them were beaten to the punch. That had happened on 3 occasions in the past 2 months, and this time marked the 4th instance. Boy, you guys laid a trap. The people acting as an opposing force were something like former criminals this time. By deliberately giving criminals captured in the domain weapons and equipment and sending them out, you created a group of fugitives. Then you sent soldiers to subjugate the dissidents that you yourselves created. It was in order to lure me out. Keisha, I certainly did not think you had read that far into the situation. Boy, it wasn't anything more than just reading the synopsis. Are you the one who wrote this? Or was it perhaps the miracle of Abelux, His Excellency Vincent Abelux? Keisha, on top of being a youth, his outspoken, smiling figure produced an inconceivably precise analysis. At the same time, Keisha understood that this boy had taken action with his sights set on Vincent. That fact that this boy was of extraordinary caliber had already been proven. As the boy said, the annihilated dissidents on this occasion had been prepared by the Abelux domain, but even so, they were 200 people willing to rampage to survive. He had exterminated them all on his own. A boy who had killed 200 riotous people could not be declared unable to kill 1,000 regular soldiers. However, Keisha, knowing that, may I ask what you intend to do? Boy, ho, I see. I think it's somewhat bad manners to respond to a question with another question, but I do really want to talk about my own feelings and objectives, so I shall answer. Decidedly, if His Excellency Vincent Abelux is everything he's cracked up to be, I wish to make him my new master. Keisha, new master. Raising a single finger, the boy briskly responded, and Keisha repeated his closing words. Then, in response, the boy gave a bright "why indeed." Receiving that answer, Keisha drew out his favored steel fan from his clothing, and placing it to his mouth, Keisha, "You mean to say that your attacks upon the dissidents until today were all to promote yourself to His Excellency Vincent?" Boy, yes. Even I don't think that directly marching into the manor and negotiating to please be hired is the right way to go about it. I had to capture his interest first and foremost. Keisha. The boy, who ought to have just given a somewhat decent analysis, suddenly became unhinged, leaving Keisha at a loss for words. On the other hand, if the boy's objective had been to draw Vincent's attention and make a strong impression of the existence known as himself, he had undoubtedly succeeded. Keisha, notoriety in favor of anonymity, I see that is the way you are thinking. Boy, yes, precisely. Notoriety. Why might that be? I think I've done a whole bunch of stuff to contribute to maintaining public order in the Abelux domain. Keisha, there are two things that prove the contrary, Firstly, it is our mission to maintain the public order of the Abelux domain, thus your actions are a usurpation of our work. Boy, But isn't it better for public order if the dissidents disappear as quickly as possible? Rather, isn't it a problem that you were so late to come? There, I win the argument. Keisha, while the second is an issue of public order, it is certainly desirable that the dissidents have disappeared. However, from the ruler's point of view, in the sense of beings who do not obey their feudal lord, just how much difference is there between a group of rebels and you, selfish as you are? Rather, in the sense of an uncontrollable power, this lone boy could be labeled a larger threat to disrupting public order than the group of dissidents, who could be subjugated without issue. Hence, the conversation returned to following the direction that Keisha had initially stated. Keisha, notoriety in favor of anonymity, at the very least, you would be greatly mistaken if you thought you were spreading great renown for yourself, Boy. Goo-goo, gugoo-goo, gugagoo-goo, Keisha. HMPH. Thrusting forth the steel fan in his hand, Keisha realized that he had said far too much, judging from the reddened face of the other party. It was a bad habit of Keisha's to talk his opponents into a corner. Or rather, it was a bad habit of his to clearly explain everything that he was thinking if prompted. In reality, when he had first met Vincent, too, he had spoken quite impolitely during their conversation within the dragon carriage. It was to the extent that Keisha himself thought he would have his head lopped off due to his irreverence. Ultimately, that did not come to pass, but he could not expect to meet the same conditions with this boy. As a result of this anger, Keisha would be torn limb from limb. Keisha, surprisingly, I have many things left undone, so I think it rather suffocating, but, boy, then, please do your best to convince me. Keisha, me. Keisha was about to lightly relinquish his own life. However, the boy presented a shocking offer. Perhaps the offer was more so audacious than shocking, but the boy's eyes sparkled, as if to say he thought it was a fantastic idea, boy. Regarding the two rebuttals you gave earlier, both of them would be completely resolved if you just enlisted me as an ally. Because it would have been the commander of your shock corps defeating the dissidents before you guys. And if I make him into my new master, then there'd be no chance for me to disobey the feudal lord. There, I win the argument. Keisha, you will have to actually argue with me if you wish to win an argument. Shrugging his shoulders at the boy's spirited words, as Keisha felt the devil's luck in this situation where he had surprisingly not lost his head, he nonetheless endeavored to understand the boy's thinking. It was not simply a matter of making excuses or evading responsibility. To begin with, it was an issue of incentive. Keisha, for what reason do you wish to make His Excellency your new master? I shall say this now, but with your abilities, you could choose whoever you please to be your master. Boy, of course that's right. After all, I'm the leading actor of this world, because the world is centered around me, right? Keisha, well then, and... Ignoring the rash remarks, Keisha prompted the boy to continue, to which he spread his arms out and gestured to the sky. Boy, it's precisely as you say. In other words, I chose to come here, all the while firmly believing that if I serve Vincent Abelux, the man who brought about the miracle of Abelux, I'll get considerably closer to achieving my desire. Keisha, and your desire would be? boy, to reach the heavenly sword. In that reply alone, no playfulness or leisure were mixed. Those words were pure. Within the declaration from the boy, who had erased his smile for just a moment, was held the power to make one believe in its truth. Before Keisha, as he caught his breath, the boy immediately cracked a thoughtless smile. Boy, that's the long-cherished desire that I, as the leading actor of this world, must accomplish at all costs. It's not good enough to just swing a katana around by myself deep in the mountains trying to accomplish that. My dad kinda wasted his whole life doing that, so I'll be going down a different path. Keisha, a path different to that of your father's, is it? You believe you will find that if you are together with His Excellency. For what reason do you place such expectations in His Excellency? Have you perhaps had the chance to exchange words with him once before? Boy, nope, not at all. I've never even seen His Excellency Vincent from a distance. But it just felt right, you know? Like a shaboom when I first learned of his name and deeds. I'm choosing to believe in that bolt of lightning that was born within me. In the boy's grandly recited words, there were, well, no tricks designed to make Keisha believe him. He ought to have prepared better-sounding words, ought to have thrown in elements that would make Keisha sympathize, ought to have incorporated reasons that would make Keisha want to support him. And yet, there was not a single fragment of that. Without any clever tricks, he was an existence truly becoming of a natural disaster. A natural disaster that seemed to entirely be saying, just watch and learn. To be precise, a natural disaster akin to a lightning bolt. Boy, but I've taken a liking to you with just a single glance. This is another thing that just feels right to me, but don't you think that we're going to get on absolutely swimmingly? Keisha, ha! Boy. Clapping his hands before his chest, the boy spoke earnestly, causing Keisha to involuntarily chuckle. Just when he had thought the boy should at least employ some tricks to win his favor. What appeared were foolish prospects, such as having taken a liking to Keisha, and the outlook that they would get on splendidly. And Keisha did not dislike those who spoke of such foolish prospects. Keisha, by the way, what about myself suited your fancy? Boy, of course. First and foremost, no matter what anybody says, your appearance. A sexy guy with a lanky, tall figure, all the while growing out long, rare black hair. There's no better selection for a unique character to easily prove that the stage is heading to meet a new development. Smiling in satisfaction, the boy gave high praise to Keisha's appearance. In all honesty, he had not expected his looks to be brought up here, so Keisha had continued to be taken by surprise. Certainly, this boy would also take Vincent by surprise. Keisha Gold, that is my name. Spinning the steel fan in his hand, Keisha returned it to his waistband and presented forth his hand. Looking down at that hand, the boy's eyes suddenly sparkled, and boy, Cecilis Segmunt, the leading actor, starring on the stage known as This World, pleased to make your acquaintance. Vigorously grabbing Keisha's hand, the boy, Cecilis, smiled from ear to ear. Having killed 200 men without getting stained with a single drop of their blood, the boy smiled. And facing him, Keisha could also not help but grin. In actuality, it was unclear if Cecilis's words were delusions, or if he would have the power to bring them to fruition. However, this was not the first time that Keisha yielded to something he did not understand. Unexpectedly, Keisha had a hunch that, as Cecilis had said, this would end up becoming a long fellowship, and one that was not so bad. And